The thunderstorm battered the lonely cabin with unrelenting fury as Sarah Blackwood pressed her back against the door, feeling each violent gust threaten to tear it from its hinges. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 angry fists, while lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating her weathered face with its cruel white light. At 42, Sarah's once auburn hair now carried streaks of gray, each one earned through years of hardship on the frontier. The sudden crash from below froze her blood. Someone or something was in her cellar. Grabbing her late husband's shotgun from above the fireplace, she descended the creaking stairs, lantern held high. "I know you're there." She called, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. "Come out now, or I'll shoot." The silence stretched until a small shape emerged from behind her preserved vegetable barrels. A boy no older than 12, covered in dirt and blood, his thin frame shivering violently. But what seized Sarah's attention were his eyes, dark, determined, and burning with a fierce pride that contradicted his desperate condition. Sarah lowered her shotgun slightly, but maintained her guard. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The boy's gaze darted to the small window he had somehow squeezed through now, partially hidden behind a stack of crates. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the storm. "They're coming." Before Sarah could question him further, she noticed the raw bleeding marks circling his ankles and wrists. Slave shackles. Her stomach turned as understanding dawned. This was no ordinary trespasser. "You're a runaway," she stated simply. He nodded once, then straightened his spine with unexpected dignity. "My name is Taza. I am Apache, not slave." The pride in his voice, despite his circumstances, stirred something long dormant in Sarah's heart. 2 years a widow, 5 years on this God-forsaken frontier, she had learned to survive by keeping to herself and avoiding others' troubles. But as thunder crashed overhead and rain pounded her roof, Sarah Blackwood made a decision that would change everything. "Come upstairs," she said finally. "Let me tend those wounds." The morning light revealed what darkness had concealed. Taza's back bore the cruel lattice of whip scars, some fresh and still weeping, others healed into permanent ridges across his copper skin. But it was the brand on his shoulder that made Sarah's hands shake with fury, a stark letter P burned deep into his flesh. "Pritchard," she whispered, recognizing the mark of the wealthiest plantation owner in the territory south of here. Taza flinched at the name, but remained silent as she cleaned his wounds with water and whiskey. "How far did you come?" she asked, applying a salve of her own making to his raw ankles. "Many days," he replied, his English simple but clear. "I follow North Star. Must warn my people." Sarah paused, cloth suspended over a particularly deep cut. Warn them about what? Taza's eyes met hers, ancient wisdom beyond his years shining in their depths. "Bad men bring new guns. Many guns. Plan to attack my people when snow comes. Kill everyone." His small hands clenched into fists. "I must reach my father. He is great chief." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle over her like a shroud. She had heard rumors of tensions rising between the army and several Apache tribes, but an armed offensive against a winter encampment would be nothing short of massacre. Before she could respond, hoofbeats approached her cabin. Peering through the window, she saw 3 riders, their dust-covered clothes and hard faces marking them instantly as trouble. "Hide!" she whispered urgently, pushing Taza toward the bedroom. "Under the bed. Don't make a sound." The boy moved silently, years of captivity having taught him the value of invisibility. Sarah smoothed her apron, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, and opened the door just as the first man raised his fist to knock. "Ma'am." He tipped his hat with false courtesy. "Jedediah Burke, licensed slave retriever from the Southern Territories. We're tracking an escaped boy Apache featured about this high." He held his hand at chest level. Dangerous little savage. Property of Mr. Everett Pritchard. Seen anyone fitting that description? Sarah crossed her arms over her chest, her face a careful mask of indifference. No. Just me here since my husband passed. Haven't seen a soul in weeks except Jeb Williams, who delivers supplies once a month. Burke's eyes narrowed, his gaze sliding past her to scan the cabin's interior. Mind if we take a look around Boy's valuable property? Mr. Pritchard's offering a handsome reward. Sarah's mind raced. These men could search her home, with or without her permission. And the law gave slave catchers broad powers, especially this close to disputed territory. But giving in too easily might raise suspicions. I don't appreciate strangers pawing through my belongings, she said stiffly. But I suppose you'll do what you want regardless. Just mind the flour sacks. Took me 3 months to save up for those. Burke smirked, gesturing for his companions to dismount. Won't take but a minute, ma'am. Appreciate your cooperation. For 20 agonizing minutes, the men searched Sarah's modest cabin, overturning furniture and emptying cupboards with casual cruelty. When they reached the bedroom, Sarah's heart hammered so loudly, she was certain they could hear it. Burke knelt beside the bed, and she held her breath, but he merely glanced underneath before rising. Cellar, he asked curtly. She nodded toward the door. Down there. Nothing but preserves and potatoes. The men descended, their heavy boots echoing on the wooden steps. Sarah remained in the kitchen, frantically trying to formulate a plan. When they returned, empty-handed, Burke's face had darkened with frustration. Boy's tracks led this direction. You sure you haven't seen anything unusual? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Quite sure. Perhaps he continued north. I hear there's a settlement of abolitionists about 50 miles that way. Burke spat on her porch. Goddamn bleeding hearts. Come on, boys. We're wasting time. As they mounted their horses, the youngest of the 3 men turned back. Ma'am, you should know that boy ain't just a runaway. He's dangerous. Killed a man during his escape. If you see him, don't approach. Send word to Marshal Kane in Redemption. After they disappeared down the dusty road, Sarah counted slowly to 100 before rushing to the bedroom. Taza, she whispered. They're gone. The boy emerged, his movements fluid and silent as a shadow. You lied for me, he stated simply, wonder evident in his voice. They would have taken you back, Sarah replied, suddenly exhausted. No child deserves what they did to your back. Taza's expression remained solemn. They lie. I kill no one. But I will die if I cannot warn my people. He hesitated, then added, Why you help me, most white people hate Apache. Sarah sank into her rocking chair, the events of the morning catching up with her. I don't hate anyone except those who profit from others' suffering, she said quietly. My husband felt the same. It's why we came north, to escape the stench of slavery. Fat lot of good it did him. Fever took him 2 winters ago. Taza stood straighter. I am sorry for your loss. Among my people a widow is honored. You have strong heart. The unexpected compliment brought a faint smile to Sarah's weathered face. Rest today. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you home. That night, fever claimed Taza. His wounds, exposed to the elements during his long journey and improperly treated before Sarah found him, had festered. She bathed his burning body with cool water-spooned broth between his cracked lips and listened as delirium loosened his tongue. In broken phrases, he spoke of his capture, a raid on a small hunting party when he was just 8 years old. The murder of his uncle before his eyes, being traded between white men like a prized horse, until Pritchard purchased him for his exotic features. He described years of backbreaking labor in cotton fields, of watching other slaves beaten for the slightest infractions of learning English by secretly listening outside the plantation house windows. But most urgently, he spoke of overheard conversations between Pritchard and Army officers about a shipment of new repeating rifles, thundersticks that never stop, and plans to surprise the Apache winter encampment when the tribe would be most vulnerable. "Father must know," he murmured repeatedly, tossing in sweat-soaked sheets. "Must warn them. So many guns, so many will die." By morning, the fever had broken. But Sarah's resolve had hardened into something like iron. She could not simply send this boy on his way and hope he survived. The journey to Apache territory would be perilous, hundreds of miles through hostile terrain, with slave catchers and the army itself standing in his way. More than that, she realized with startling clarity that she cared what happened to him. In just 2 days, Taza had awakened something she thought long dead, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. While the boy slept, Sarah made preparations. She packed preserved meat hardtack, a canteen, and a small knife she could easily conceal. She found an old shirt of her husband's that might serve as a disguise if cut down to size. Most precious of all, she retrieved a small pouch of gold coins from beneath a loose floorboard, her emergency fund untouched even in the leanest times. As she worked, a plan began to form. She would need supplies from town, information about patrol routes, perhaps even a second horse. The journey would not be easy, but the sound of approaching riders interrupted her thoughts. Rushing to the window, Sarah cursed under her breath. Burke had returned this time, accompanied by 5 men, including one whose polished badge gleamed in the sunlight. Marshal Kane. Quickly, she shook Taza awake. "They're back with the law this time. Quick into the root cellar." She led him to a small trap-door beneath the kitchen table, concealed by a worn rug. "There's a false wall behind the potato bin. Get inside and don't make a sound no matter what you hear." The boy's eyes widened with understanding. "They hurt you if they find me." It wasn't a question. Sarah gripped his shoulders. "That's my concern, not yours. Your people need that warning. That's what matters now." As Taza disappeared into the hidden space, Sarah replaced the rug and straightened her home as best she could before the inevitable knock came. Marshal Kane cut an imposing figure, his tall frame filling her doorway. Unlike Burke's false politeness, Kane made no pretense of courtesy. "Mrs. Blackwood, we have reason to believe you're harboring a fugitive slave. Step aside." Sarah stood her ground. "On whose authority I live alone, Marshal, as you well know." Kane's cold eyes assessed her. "Got a sworn statement from one of Burke's men that he saw movement in your window after they left yesterday, too big to be just you. That plus slave tracks leading directly to your property gives me all the authority I need." He pushed past her, gesturing for his men to follow. "Search everything, every corner, every crawl space." For the second time in as many days, Sarah watched strangers violate her home. This time they were more thorough, slashing her mattress, breaking floorboards, even emptying her flour sacks onto the ground, precious food wasted in their brutal search. When they reached the kitchen, Sarah's heart nearly stopped as Kane's boot landed squarely on the rug, concealing the trap door. "What's under here?" he demanded, kicking the rug aside. "Root cellar," Sarah answered, fighting to keep her voice steady. "For storing vegetables through winter." Kane yanked open the door, peering into the darkness below. "Lantern," he barked, and one of his deputies rushed to comply. Sarah watched, barely breathing, as the marshal descended the ladder. Minutes stretched like hours as sounds of searching echoed from below. Sacks, overturned jars, smashed shelves splintered under rough handling. Finally, Kane reemerged, his face twisted with frustration. "Nothing," he spat. But I know that boy was here, Mrs. Blackwood. Folks saw him running this direction, and not a single track leads away from your property. He stepped closer, towering over her. Helping a runaway is a federal offense. Could get you 5 years in prison, maybe worse, considering what that savage is accused of. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. I've broken no laws, Marshal. Now, unless you plan to arrest me for growing potatoes, I'd appreciate you and your men leaving my property. A dangerous look crossed Kane's face. You think you're clever, woman. But I know about you and your late husband's sympathizers, both of you. Too good to own slaves like civilized folk. Well, let me tell you something. He leaned in his voice, dropping to a menacing whisper. That boy isn't just Pritchard's property. He's got information valuable to the Army, information about Apache gold mines. That's why there's such a high price on his head. So, if you know where he is now, would be a very good time to say so. Sarah's mind raced. Gold Mines Taza had mentioned nothing about gold, only weapons and a planned massacre. Kane was lying either to entice her cooperation or because he himself had been misled. Either way, it confirmed her worst suspicions about the Army's intentions toward the Apache. I can't help you, Marshal, she said firmly. Now please leave. Kane studied her for a long moment before stepping back. Post men around the property, he ordered his deputies. No one comes or goes without my knowledge. Mrs. Blackwood is confined to her home until further notice. He turned back to Sarah, a cold smile playing at his lips. Let's see how cooperative you feel after a few days without supplies. Folks tend to get reasonable when they're hungry. After they withdrew, Sarah sank into her chair, mind spinning. She was effectively under house arrest, with no way to get Taza to safety or even send a message. As darkness fell, she cautiously lit a single candle and opened the trap door. Taza, she whispered into the darkness. You can come out now, but we must be quiet. There are men watching the house. The hidden panels slid aside, and the boy emerged, his expression grim with understanding. I heard everything, he said softly. The marshal lies about gold. My people have no gold mines. I know, Sarah replied. But that lie makes you even more valuable to them. If they believe you have information about gold, they'll never stop hunting you. Taza nodded solemnly. What will we do? Sarah guided him to the kitchen table where she spread out a rough map of the territory drawn from memory. We need to get you west toward your people's winter grounds. But first, we have to get past Kane's men. She pointed to the creek that ran behind her property. This leads to Jenkins' farm. He raises horses, good ones, fast ones. If we could reach his pasture without being seen. Taza studied the map intently. How many men watch us? Sarah had counted during her careful circuit of the windows. 4, I think. 1 at each corner of the property. But they'll be alert, especially at night. The boy's expression turned thoughtful. My people know how to move unseen, even on moonlit night. My uncle taught me before, he faltered briefly, before the raid. But we need distraction. For 3 days they waited and planned, subsisting on Sarah's dwindling preserves, while Kane's men maintained their vigil. On the 4th morning, opportunity arrived in the form of Jenkins himself, driving his wagon toward town, along the road past Sarah's cabin. Kane intercepted him, and through her window, Sarah could see them conversing. Jenkins appeared agitated, gesturing toward his farm. When the marshal dispatched 2 of his men to accompany Jenkins back to his property, Sarah understood something had happened at the farm, something requiring investigation. Now, she whispered to Taza, we must move now while they're down to just 2 men. Their plan was simple but dangerous. Sarah would create a diversion at the front of the property, giving Taza a chance to slip away toward the creek. If he could reach Jenkins's farm, he might secure a horse before the deputies returned with the farmer. Sarah gripped the boy's shoulders. Remember, stay low in the creek bed. Don't emerge until you're well past the sight line of the cabin. And if you hear shots... Taza's dark eyes met hers unflinchingly. I keep going. For my people. Sarah nodded, her throat suddenly tight. One more thing. She pressed the pouch of coins into his small hand. This should be enough to barter for a horse food, whatever you need to reach your father. Taza stared at the pouch, then back at Sarah, clearly understanding the magnitude of her sacrifice. I will repay this debt. My father will honor you among our people forever. Sarah shook her head. There is no debt. Just live, Taza. Warn your people. That's payment enough. The boy tucked the pouch into his shirt, then did something unexpected. He embraced her briefly, fiercely. You have warrior's heart, he whispered. Sarah blinked back sudden tears as she moved toward the door. Ready. At his nod, she grabbed a wooden bucket and stepped onto her porch. Water, she called to the nearest deputy. For God's sake, am I to die of thirst while the marshal plays his games? I need water from the well. The young deputy shifted uncomfortably clearly, uncertain how to respond to her demand. Perfect, as Sarah engaged the deputy in increasingly heated argument, drawing the attention of his companion as well. Taza slipped out the back window and into the tall grass behind the cabin. Moving with the fluid grace of a natural hunter, he made his way toward the creek, using every bit of cover available. Sarah prolonged the confrontation, her voice rising with staged indignation. This is an outrage. I'm an American citizen, not some criminal. You have no right to... She broke off, gasping dramatically and pointing toward the road. What in God's name is that? Both deputies turned instinctively, giving Taza his final opportunity to disappear into the creek bed. By the time the confused men realized they'd been tricked, Sarah was already back inside her cabin door, bolted. She had perhaps minutes before they'd force their way and search the house and discover Taza missing. Quickly, she gathered what few valuables remained: her wedding ring, a daguerreotype of her husband, a small Bible, knowing she might never see her home again. The sound of angry voices and approaching footsteps confirmed her fear. The deputies had alerted Marshal Kane. The door splintered beneath Kane's boot as Sarah calmly sat at her kitchen table, hands folded before her. Where is he? The marshal demanded, face purple with rage. Sarah smiled thinly. Who? Kane's hand cracked across her cheek, the blow snapping her head sideways. The boy, you deceitful bitch. Where did you send him? Tasting blood, Sarah straightened in her chair. Even if I knew Marshal, I wouldn't tell you. Not now, not ever. Kane grabbed her by the arm, yanking her to her feet. Search every inch of the property, he barked to his men. And bring the rope. Mrs. Blackwood here is about to discover the penalty for interfering with federal business. Fear clawed at Sarah's throat as she was dragged outside, but she fought to maintain her composure. If she could keep them focused on her searching her property, Taza would have more time to reach Jenkins' farm and secure a horse. Every minute mattered now. They tied her to a post in her own front yard, the rough rope biting into her wrists. Kane paced before her, periodically barking questions that she steadfastly refused to answer. As the sun climbed higher, her thirst became a torment, but still she kept silent. One by one, the deputies returned from searching the surrounding area, each shaking his head. No sign of the boy. Kane's frustration mounted visibly, until finally he grabbed Sarah's chin, forcing her to look at him. Last chance, Mrs. Blackwood. Where is the Apache boy headed? Sarah met his gaze without wavering. To hell with you, Marshal. Kane's eyes narrowed dangerously. "No, Mrs. Blackwood. It's you who'll be visiting hell." He turned to his men. "Burn it. Burn everything." Horror gripped Sarah as two deputies entered her cabin with lit torches. Within minutes, flames engulfed the small home she had shared with her husband, where they had dreamed of building a life free from the moral corruption of the slave states. Every possession, every memory going up in smoke. Yet as tears streamed down her face, she felt something else too fierce pride. Taza was free, racing toward his people with vital information that could save countless lives. After the fire reduced her home to smoldering ruins, Kane ordered Sarah loaded onto a horse. "We're taking her to redemption," he told his men. "Public hanging should remind folks what happens to those who harbor savages and defy the law." One of the younger deputies looked uneasy. "Sir, we don't have proper authorization for an execution. Shouldn't there be a trial?" Kane silenced him with a glare. "I'm the law in this territory, boy, and I say she's earned the rope." As they rode toward town, Sarah's mind worked frantically. Jenkins' farm was west of her property, in the direction of the Apache territories directly opposite from the road to redemption. If Taza had secured a horse, he would be miles away by now, following the directions she had carefully explained using the stars and landmarks. But what if he had been caught? What if Jenkins himself had captured the boy, recognizing him from the wanted posters now plastered across the territory? Doubt gnawed at her as the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves. The town of Redemption appeared on the horizon. As afternoon waned, its cluster of weather-beaten buildings, a stark interruption of the vast prairie. Word of their approach spread quickly, and by the time Kane's party reached the main street, curious townsfolk had gathered to witness the spectacle. Mrs. Blackwood helped a dangerous fugitive escape federal custody. Kane announced his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "A savage who murdered a white man and stole valuable Army intelligence. For these crimes against the United States government, she will hang at sunset." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. Sarah recognized some faces people she had traded with, nodded to in passing during her infrequent visits to town. Few met her eyes now, their gazes sliding away uncomfortably. These people might not approve of Kane's harsh justice, but none would dare stand against him. The marshal's reputation for brutal retribution was well established in these parts. As Kane's men constructed a makeshift gallows in the town square, Sarah was locked in the jailhouse, a small wooden structure containing just 2 cells. Through the barred window, she could see the last rays of sunlight, painting the dusty street gold. Sunset approached. Death approached. Yet strangely, she felt a certain peace. Her parents had raised her to believe that every soul must eventually answer for their moral choices. If today was her day of reckoning, she would face it knowing she had chosen rightly. The jailhouse door creaked open, and Kane entered, followed by a nervous-looking man in a priest's collar. "Thought you might want last rites," the marshal said, his tone mocking. Though God may not be too keen on forgiving those who side with heathens over their own kind. Sarah straightened her spine, meeting his gaze steadily. "I've made my peace with God, Marshal. Have you?" Something flickered in Kane's eyes, doubt perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of conscience, before his expression hardened once more. "Bring her," he ordered his deputies. The noose felt rough and heavy around Sarah's neck as she stood on the wooden platform facing the crowd that had grown considerably as word spread. Men, women, even children had gathered to witness her execution. Some looked troubled, others coldly curious, a few openly hostile. Kane stood beside her, seemingly savoring his moment of triumph. "Let this be a lesson," he called out, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "The law in these territories will be respected. Those who aid enemies of America, be they slaves, savages, or foreign agents, will face the ultimate penalty." He turned to Sarah. "Any last words before you meet your maker, Mrs. Blackwood?" Sarah surveyed the crowd slowly, her gaze lingering on each face. "I regret nothing," she said clearly, her voice stronger than she had expected. "If protecting an innocent child from cruelty means my death, then I die gladly. But know this, the true enemies of America are not those with different skin or different gods. They are those who twist law into tyranny and justice into vengeance." Kane's face darkened with anger. "Enough of this seditious trash. Deputies, prepare to—" His words died in his throat as a sound unlike any other split the evening air, a high-piercing war cry that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The crowd's collective gasp was followed by screams as mounted warriors appeared at the edge of town and their painted faces fierce in the fading light. "Apache!" Someone shouted, and panic erupted. Townsfolk scattered in all directions as Kane drew his pistol. "To arms!" he bellowed, but it was already too late. The warriors swept into the square with devastating precision arrows, finding targets among the deputies before they could organize a defense. Sarah stood frozen on the gallows platform, and the noose still around her neck as chaos unfolded below. Through the confusion, she spotted a familiar small figure riding double behind a warrior Taza, his face transformed with triumph. A massive warrior on a paint horse charged directly toward the gallows bow drawn. His arrow found its mark in Kane's shoulder, sending the marshal crashing to his knees with a howl of pain. The warrior leapt from his horse onto the platform, with impossible grace, a knife gleaming in his hand. Sarah flinched, expecting death. But instead the blade sliced through the rope above her head, then the bindings at her wrists. "The woman lives," the warrior commanded in English, his voice deep and powerful. "No one touches her." Standing tall beside Sarah, he raised his knife high, and the attacking warriors immediately responded to his signal, withdrawing from their individual skirmishes to form a protective circle around the gallows. In the sudden, eerie silence that followed, the warrior spoke again. "I am Chief Naiche of the Chiricahua Apache. This woman saved my son and brought warning of your treachery. She stands under my protection now." Sarah stared at the imposing figure beside her, suddenly understanding. This was Taza's father, the great chief he had been so desperate to reach. From his position on the ground, Kane struggled to his feet, blood seeping through his fingers as he clutched his wounded shoulder. "This changes nothing," he snarled. "That boy is still Pritchard's legal property, and this woman is still guilty of violating federal law. There are 100 soldiers stationed at Fort Benton who will hunt you down for this attack." Chief Naiche's expression remained impassive as Taza urged his mount forward, addressing Kane directly. "You lie about everything," the boy said clearly. "No gold mines. Just guns to murder my people in winter camp. I heard Army men say so at plantation." Murmurs rippled through the remaining townsfolk who had cautiously emerged from hiding places to witness this extraordinary confrontation. Kane's face contorted with fury. "Shut your mouth, boy. You don't know what you heard." But the damage was done. Sarah saw confusion and dismay on many faces in the crowd. Massacring hostile warriors in battle was one thing. Slaughtering women and children in a winter camp was quite another. Chief Naiche stepped forward, his powerful presence commanding attention. "We came only for the woman and truth. We go now, but remember this day. Apache people know your plans now. We will be ready." He turned to Sarah, offering his hand. "You come with us. No longer safe for you here." Sarah hesitated only briefly before accepting his hand, allowing him to pull her onto his horse behind him. As they prepared to depart, one of the townsfolk, the blacksmith, a burly man Sarah had traded with, occasionally stepped forward cautiously. "Mrs. Blackwood saved my daughter from fever last winter when no one else would help," he called. "She's a good woman. This ain't right what's happening to her. Others nodded, a few voicing agreement. Kane stared in disbelief as support for Sarah grew among the gathered citizens. "She's a traitor," he shouted, siding with savages against her own kind. The blacksmith spat in the dust. "Seems to me the only savage here is the one who'd hang a widow without trial for showing mercy." Chief Nietzsche observed this exchange with interest before addressing the crowd. For many years, Apache and White Eyes fight. Much blood on both sides. But today we see not all White Eyes want war. This woman, he nodded toward Sarah, has heart of warrior, but hands of healer. Among my people she will be honored. With that, he wheeled his horse around, and the Apache warriors formed a protective formation around them. As they rode from town, Sarah glanced back at the life she was leaving behind. The smoldering ruins of Kane's authority, the curious and somewhat odd faces of the townsfolk, the still-standing gallows where she had nearly met her end. Ahead lay uncertainty, a new existence among people whose language and customs were foreign to her. Yet she felt no regret, only a curious lightness. For the first time since her husband's death, she had acted with complete moral conviction, consequences be damned. There was freedom in that, a liberation more profound than mere survival. They rode through the night, following ancient trails invisible to untrained eyes. By dawn, they had left the settled territories far behind, entering the rugged wilderness that the Apache called home. Taza rode alongside Sarah, now his face alight with pride as he pointed out landmarks and explained their significance in halting English. The boy who had crawled bleeding into her cellar was transformed here among his people. His natural dignity and intelligence shone unconstrained. When they finally stopped to make camp beside a clear running stream, Chief Nietzsche approached Sarah as she sat resting against a boulder. "My son tells me you risked everything to help him," he said, his English careful but fluent. "Why would you do this for Apache boy?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Because it was right," she said simply. "Because every person deserves freedom and dignity, regardless of the color of their skin or where they were born." The chief studied her thoughtfully. "Many white people speak of freedom with forked tongue. They want freedom for themselves, not others." Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, that's the great contradiction at the heart of my country. We proclaim liberty while denying it to others. My husband and I came north because we couldn't bear to live surrounded by such hypocrisy anymore." A faint smile touched the chief's weathered face. "Taza says you have warrior's heart. I see he speaks truth." He gestured toward the distant mountains rising purple against the horizon. "Our winter camp lies 3 days' journey from here. You will be welcome among us for as long as you choose to stay." Sarah looked around at the Apache warriors, at Taza's beaming face, at the vast wilderness stretching before them, so different from the settled lands she had known all her life. Fear mingled with exhilaration in her chest. "I don't know your ways," she admitted. "I don't know if I can survive in this land." Chief Nietzsche's expression remained grave, but his eyes held unexpected warmth. "You already survive many things that would break others. Apache people respect strength, courage, loyalty. These things you have proven." As the journey to the winter encampment continued, Sarah found herself gradually accepted by the Apache warriors. They were cautious at first, naturally suspicious of a white woman in their midst. But Taza's enthusiastic accounts of her bravery, translated by those who spoke better English, earned her a measure of respect. She learned that Chief Nietzsche had once been captured by white soldiers himself, held prisoner for nearly a year before escaping. He understood the courage it took to defy one's own people for the sake of justice. On the third day, they crested a ridge to reveal a stunning valley below, sheltered by towering cliffs and bisected by a winding river. Hundreds of wickiups dotted the landscape, smoke rising from cooking fires as children played and women worked at various tasks. Our winter home, Taza said proudly. Safe place, protected. Nor Sarah marveled at the strategic positioning of the encampment, difficult to approach, unseen, with clear escape routes in multiple directions and water readily available. These were people who had learned to survive against overwhelming odds, who had adapted to both the harsh landscape and the constant threat of enemies. Their arrival caused a sensation. Women, children, and elders gathered to welcome the returning warriors, their curious gazes fixed on Sarah. Chief Nightshade addressed his people in their own language, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. Though Sarah couldn't understand his words, she recognized when he gestured to her and to Taza, obviously recounting their story. Expressions changed from suspicious to wondering to respectful as the tale unfolded. When he finished speaking, an elderly woman approached Sarah, offering a beautifully woven blanket and speaking words that needed no translation: welcome, gratitude, acceptance. That night, seated at the central fire as guest of honor, Sarah watched as the Apache performed dances, celebrating the safe return of their warriors and the rescue of the chief's son. The rhythmic movements, the haunting songs, the sense of community and purpose all stood in stark contrast to the isolated existence she had known as a widow on the frontier. In the weeks that followed, Sarah found unexpected purpose among the Apache. Her knowledge of herbal medicine complemented their own healing traditions, and she worked alongside the tribe's medicine women, each learning from the other. Taza became her constant companion, eager to improve his English, while teaching her words and phrases in his own language. Through him, she learned the Apache ways, their profound connection to the land, their complex social structure, and their fierce devotion to freedom. My people never slaves, Taza explained one day as they gathered medicinal plants on a hillside above the camp. Better to die fighting than live in chains. Sarah understood now why his captivity had been especially torturous, not just the physical cruelty, but the spiritual wounds inflicted by bondage on a soul born to freedom. Yet despite everything he had endured, Taza retained a remarkable capacity for joy, his laughter coming easily as he showed her how to track small game or identify edible plants. Winter deepened snow blanketing the valley and sealing the mountain passes. The warning Taza had delivered proved its worth twice. Army patrols approached the region, but found nothing, the Apache having temporarily relocated to secondary camps deeper in the wilderness before returning to their protected valley. Sarah gradually adapted to life among the tribe, learning to move silently through forest, to preserve meat to tan hides, to read the subtle signs of weather changes. The physical hardship was considerable: cold nights, simple food, constant vigilance. But she found herself stronger in both body and spirit than she had been in years. More than that, she discovered a sense of belonging that had eluded her even in her own community. Here her worth was measured not by conformity, but by contribution, not by obedience, but by integrity. When she spoke, people listened. When she disagreed, her perspective was considered with respect. As spring approached, bringing the first green shoots pushing through melting snow, Sarah sat with Chief Nightshade beside the river that sustained their encampment. "My scouts bring news," he said gravely. "Army builds new fort near Yellow River. Many soldiers, many guns." Sarah nodded slowly, unsurprised. The respite had been temporary. The government's determination to claim Apache land had merely been delayed, not abandoned. "What will you do?" she asked. The chief's weathered face revealed nothing, but his eyes held ancient sorrow. "We have fought many enemies for many generations. Sometimes we fight, sometimes we move, sometimes we make peace. But now choices grow smaller with each season." He gestured toward the children playing nearby. "I must think of their future, not just today's battle." Sarah understood the impossible weight of his responsibility to preserve not just lives, but an entire way of life in the face of an enemy whose resources seemed limitless. That night, unable to sleep, Sarah walked to the edge of the camp, gazing at stars scattered like silver dust across the vast canopy of sky. "You think of leaving?" a voice said quietly behind her. She turned to find Taza, no longer the frightened boy from her cellar, but a young warrior in training, his bearing increasingly like his father's. "How did you know?" she asked, not bothering to deny it. He smiled faintly. "Your eyes look to horizon more each day." Sarah sighed, sitting on a boulder and motioning for him to join her. "I've been thinking about what I might do to help your people. Here I'm just another mouth to feed. But out there," she gestured toward the distant lands beyond the mountains, "I might be useful." Taza's expression grew solemn. "You want to speak for Apache to white people?" It wasn't a question. "Some white people listen to other white people," Sarah explained. "If I could reach those with influence, tell them the truth about what's happening here, about broken promises and planned massacres, perhaps it could make a difference." Taza considered this, his young face grave beyond his years. "Father says many whites make promises, but few keep them. Why would they listen now?" Sarah had no easy answer. "Most won't," she admitted. "But there are newspapers in the East that publish accounts of government wrongdoing. There are societies formed to protect Indian rights. If enough voices join together—" She trailed off, aware of how fragile her hopes sounded when spoken aloud. Taza reached out, taking her hand in a gesture that bridged their different worlds. "Your heart is good, Sarah. But be careful. Marshal Kane still hunts you. Plantation owner still wants me back. Many enemies wait beyond mountains." Sarah squeezed his hand, touched by his concern. "I survived before," she reminded him gently. "And now I'm stronger thanks to your people. I know how to move quietly, how to read the land. I'll be careful." Taza nodded slowly, acceptance in his eyes. "When will you tell Father?" The conversation with Chief Nightshade came sooner than she had planned. The following day, scouts reported a large military detachment moving toward the region. Not a routine patrol, but a significant force with supply wagons, suggesting a long-term operation. The chief called a council of the tribe's elders and war leaders, including Sarah in this critical discussion, an unprecedented honor for an outsider. Maps drawn in the dirt showed the approaching soldiers' possible escape routes, defensive positions. As the others debated strategy in their language, Sarah studied the crude map, an idea forming. "The army doesn't know that you know they're coming," she said suddenly, drawing all eyes to her. "That's your advantage." Chief Nightshade nodded for her to continue. "What if they received a letter A detailed account of their own plans, proving that their secrecy is compromised? It might give them pause, make them reconsider." The chief's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Who would write such letter? Who would deliver it?" "I would," Sarah stated simply. "I can write it in language they'll respect, formal, official. I'll explain that I've lived among the Apache, that I've seen their peaceful intentions, their desire to avoid bloodshed. I'll warn that any attack on this tribe will be met with resistance, but also widely reported to Eastern newspapers." She looked around the circle of attentive faces. "And I'll sign my name Sarah Blackwood, formerly of Redemption Territory. They'll know I'm not bluffing." A murmur rippled through the gathered leaders, some nodding approval, others clearly skeptical. Chief Nightshade raised his hand for silence. "Words on paper have power for white men," he acknowledged. "But delivering such message is dangerous." Sarah straightened her spine. "I was prepared to die rather than betray Taza. I'm prepared to risk my life for all of you now." The chief studied her for a long moment before turning to the others, speaking rapidly in Apache. The discussion grew heated, hands gesturing emphatically as various opinions were expressed. Finally, the chief turned back to Sarah. "We accept your offer, but you will not go alone." 2 days later, Sarah rode from the Apache encampment, accompanied by 2 warriors skilled in both languages and diplomatic engagement men who had previously served as negotiators with other tribes and occasionally with white authorities. Their mission was dangerous, but clear: deliver the carefully composed letter to the commanding officer of the approaching army detachment. Then continue eastward, Sarah, carrying copies of the same letter to territorial newspapers and eventually to contacts in Washington itself. The night before her departure had been emotional, the tribe gathering to honor her with songs, gifts, and blessings. Taza had fought tears as he embraced her. "You saved me," he whispered fiercely. "Now you save my people. I will become warrior worthy of such friendship." Sarah had held him close, this remarkable child who had changed her life so profoundly. "You already are a warrior," she told him. "The strongest I've ever known." Now, as her horse picked its way down the mountain trail, Sarah carried their stories with her, not just Taza's, but all of them. The elderly medicine woman who had shared her wisdom so generously. The young mothers who had welcomed her into their circle despite their initial wariness. The hunters who had taught her to move silently through forest. The elders whose tales spanned generations of both hardship and triumph. These were not the savages of popular imagination, but a people fighting desperately to preserve their way of life against overwhelming odds. In her saddlebag rested the letter, carefully worded, to convey both warning and opportunity. An invitation to peace, alongside a clear-eyed assessment of the consequences of continued aggression. Whether it would make any difference, Sarah couldn't know. But she had to try for Taza, for his people, and for her own conscience. The military camp appeared 2 days later, a collection of canvas tents arranged in precise rows at the junction of 2 rivers. Soldiers moved about in the organized chaos of an operation in progress, unloading wagons, digging latrines, establishing perimeter guards. Sarah and her companions observed from a concealed position on a ridge overlooking the activity. "Many guns," one warrior noted grimly. "New kind, like Taza warned." Sarah nodded, spotting the distinctive profile of repeating rifles among the weapons. This force came prepared not for negotiation, but for overwhelming victory. Drawing a deep breath, she turned to her companions. "Remember the plan. If I'm not back by nightfall, return to the chief. Tell him to move the tribe deeper into the mountains immediately." The men nodded solemnly, respect evident in their eyes. Sarah straightened her dress, one she had carefully preserved from her former life, now looking oddly formal and out of place after months in Apache clothing. "Wish me luck," she said, attempting a smile before urging her horse down the slope toward the camp. The young sentry nearly dropped his rifle in shock when Sarah rode calmly up to the camp's perimeter. "I need to speak with your commanding officer," she announced with an authority she didn't entirely feel. "It's a matter of urgent importance regarding your current mission." The flustered soldier called for his sergeant, who stared at Sarah with undisguised suspicion before escorting her under armed guard to the largest tent at the center of the camp. Inside, a gray-haired officer bent over maps spread across a folding table. He straightened at their entrance, eyebrows rising in surprise. "Sir, this woman rode into camp asking to speak with you," the sergeant reported. "Says it's urgent." The officer studied Sarah with calculating eyes. "Colonel James Harrison, United States Army." He introduced himself stiffly. "And you are?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Sarah Blackwood, formerly of Redemption Territory." Recognition flickered across the colonel's face. "The woman who aided the escaped slave. You're wanted for questioning by the territorial authorities." "I'm aware," Sarah replied calmly. But I'm here on a different matter, one that concerns the mission you're currently planning against the Apache. The colonel's expression hardened. I don't discuss military operations with civilians, particularly those with questionable loyalty. Undeterred, Sarah withdrew the sealed letter from her pocket. This contains detailed information about your planned offensive, the timing the approach routes the weapons you've received. Information your superiors believe is secret, but is in fact known to Chief Nightshade and his entire tribe. She placed the letter on the table between them. They're prepared for you, Colonel. An attack now would result in significant casualties on both sides, and for what another broken treaty. More civilian deaths that will shock the conscience of Eastern newspapers. Harrison's face remained impassive, but Sarah noted the slight tightening of his jaw. That's quite a speech, Mrs. Blackwood, but if you've been living among savages as your appearance and knowledge suggest, why should I consider you anything but a traitor? Sarah straightened her spine. Because I'm offering you an opportunity, Colonel, one that could benefit your career far more than a bloody campaign against women and children. Chief Nightshade is willing to meet with you under flag of truce to discuss terms for peaceful coexistence. She gestured toward the letter. The details are all there, including his conditions for the meeting. I suggest you read it carefully before dismissing the possibility. Harrison's gaze flicked between Sarah and the letter's skepticism warring with curiosity. After a long moment, he broke the seal and began to read, his expression growing increasingly troubled as he absorbed the contents. When he finally looked up, his eyes held a new wariness. These details about our weapons shipment, our planned approach, how could the Apache possibly know this? Sarah smiled thinly. Perhaps you should ask yourself why a 12-year-old boy was worth pursuing so desperately across territorial lines. Taza may have been young, but his ears worked perfectly well when officers visited his master's plantation. Colonel Harrison paced the length of his tent, clearly disturbed by the implications. Even if I believed this, and I'm not saying I do, I have my orders, Mrs. Blackwood. The settlement of these territories is a national priority. The Apache have resisted previous attempts at relocation to reservations. Sarah nodded. Yes, they have, because those reservations were on barren land where no one could possibly survive. Did your orders specifically mention annihilation, Colonel, or were they perhaps more ambiguous? Pacify the region. Remove obstacles to settlement. Phrases that give men like you considerable latitude in execution. She took a calculated risk, stepping closer. I've seen your service medals. You've devoted your life to this country. Do you really want your legacy to be the massacre of an entire tribe? Especially when there might be another way. Harrison's weathered face revealed nothing but something shifted in his eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or the faintest glimmer of conscience. For several minutes, the colonel stood in silence, weighing options, calculating risks. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. I can delay our advance for 3 days, no more. If your chief wants to meet, it will be on my terms, at the neutral ground described in this letter. He fixed Sarah with a hard stare. But be very clear, Mrs. Blackwood. If this is some sort of trap, I will not hesitate to bring the full might of the United States Army against your Apache friends, and you will hang as a traitor. Sarah met his gaze unflinchingly. It's not a trap, Colonel. It's possibly the last chance for peace in this region. I suggest you use those 3 days to consider what kind of man you wish history to remember. Turning on her heel, she left the tent with as much dignity as she could muster, heart pounding beneath her composed exterior. The first and most dangerous part of her mission was complete. Now she could only pray that both sides would approach the upcoming negotiation with genuine intent for peace. The meeting took place on the agreed neutral ground, a flat expanse beside a meandering river equidistant from the army camp and the hidden Apache encampment. Colonel Harrison arrived with a small detachment of soldiers, while Chief Naiche brought an equal number of warriors. Sarah stood between the two groups, her unique position as intermediary, a powerful symbol of the bridge that might yet be built between these opposing worlds. The negotiations were tense progress, measured in inches rather than miles. The army demanded the Apache relocate to designated reservation land. The Apache countered with evidence of that land's inability to sustain life. Harrison insisted on military access to certain mountain passes. Naiche required guarantees against surprise attacks. Hour after hour, the discussions continued, Sarah translating not just words, but cultural contexts, helping each side understand the other's fundamental concerns. As sunset painted the landscape in fiery hues, an unexpected compromise emerged. The Apache would accept relocation, but to a region of their choosing within the territory fertile land with adequate water and hunting grounds. In exchange, they would permit settlers safe passage through designated routes and cease raids on settlements. The army would establish a small outpost near the new Apache territory, but with strict limitations on troop movements and a formal notification process before any military activities. Neither side was fully satisfied, the hallmark of a successful negotiation, but both could claim meaningful victories. As the details were committed to paper, Sarah felt cautious hope bloom in her chest. This agreement, if honored, could spare countless lives on both sides. More than that, it could establish a precedent for coexistence rather than extermination across the territories. The document was signed as darkness fell, illuminated by torchlight. Colonel Harrison's formal signature alongside Chief Naiche's distinctive mark. Copies were made for each party and an additional one for Sarah to carry eastward, physical proof of what was possible when violence gave way to dialogue. As the two groups prepared to return to their respective camps, Harrison approached Sarah privately. "You've accomplished something remarkable here, Mrs. Blackwood," he said quietly. "But you should know Marshal Kane still has a warrant for your arrest. Pritchard is offering a substantial reward for the return of his property. The territory isn't safe for you." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. "That's why I'm heading east, Colonel. There are people in Washington who need to hear this story, not just about today's agreement, but about everything that led to it. A boy branded as property. A planned massacre disguised as military necessity. A peace achieved not through force, but through understanding." Harrison studied her thoughtfully. "You'll need safe passage at least until you're beyond territorial jurisdiction." To her surprise, he removed an official letter from his coat bearing the Army seal. "This identifies you as acting under my authority on a mission of diplomatic importance. It should prevent interference from local law enforcement, though I'd still advise avoiding Marshal Kane if possible." Sarah accepted the document with stunned gratitude. "Thank you, Colonel. I didn't expect—" Harrison cut her off with a raised hand. "I've served this country for 30 years, Mrs. Blackwood. Fought in 2 wars. I'd like to believe I'm still capable of recognizing the difference between lawful duty and blind injustice." He straightened, military bearing reasserting itself. "Good luck on your journey. I hope those Washington politicians have the wisdom to listen." With a crisp nod, he returned to his men, leaving Sarah to marvel at the unexpected ally she had found. The journey east was long and arduous, but Sarah traveled with renewed purpose. At each territorial newspaper, she shared the story of Taza's escape, the Apache's plight, and the historic treaty that might offer a new model for Indian-white relations across the frontier. Some editors dismissed her as a deluded sympathizer. Others recognized the powerful human narrative and gave it prominent placement. By the time she reached St. Louis, her story had begun to ripple through public consciousness, picked up and reprinted by larger publications. In Washington, meetings with senators and representatives yielded mixed results. Many listened politely, but without commitment, while a few passionate reformers embraced her cause with genuine fervor. The treaty itself was submitted for formal ratification, its progress through governmental bureaucracy agonizingly slow but steadily advancing. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall, as Sarah continued her advocacy. She formed alliances with abolitionist groups and Indian rights organizations, her first-hand experience, lending powerful credibility to their broader causes. When not engaged in political meetings, she wrote detailed accounts of Apache culture and customs, personal narratives of her time. Among them, careful explanations of their legitimate grievances against government policies. These writings found increasing readership, particularly among educated Easterners hungry for authentic perspectives on frontier conflicts. Through it all, Sarah maintained correspondence with Colonel Harrison, who faithfully reported on the treaty's implementation. The news was cautiously positive. The Apache had relocated to their chosen territory. Settlers were respecting boundaries. Military patrols maintained agreed-upon protocols. It wasn't perfect, nothing involving such fundamental clashes of interest could be, but it was holding. As winter approached once more, Sarah received a letter addressed in familiar handwriting, Taza's careful English script, so diligently practiced during their lessons together. The boy wrote of his people's new settlement of tensions that flared occasionally, but were increasingly resolved through the mechanisms established in the treaty. He described his continuing education, his training as both a warrior and a future leader, who would need to navigate the complicated relationship with the white man's world. Most meaningfully, he wrote of how Sarah's courage had changed everything, not just for him personally, but for his entire tribe. "Father says you have name among our people now," he wrote. "It means woman who stands between worlds. He says such people are rare but precious, like water in desert." The letter concluded with an invitation Sarah had not dared hope for to return west, to visit the new Apache settlement, to see firsthand the fragile peace she had helped create. On a crisp autumn morning, Sarah stood on the platform of Washington's train station, her modest belongings packed for the long journey west. The past year had changed her profoundly. The timid widow, who once feared her own shadow, had become a respected voice in policy circles, her experiences informing debates on both Indian affairs and the increasingly divisive question of slavery. She had testified before congressional committees, published articles in leading newspapers, spoken at public gatherings throughout the Northeast. But despite these accomplishments, her heart had never truly settled in these eastern cities with their noise and crowds and political machinations. The open spaces of the frontier called to her, not the isolated homestead of her widowhood, but the vibrant community where she had found unexpected belonging. As the train pulled away from the station, steam billowing in the morning light, Sarah gazed out the window at the passing landscape. She thought of all that had transpired since that stormy night when a desperate boy had sought shelter in her cellar, the fear, the sacrifice, the near execution, the unlikely alliance, the hard-won peace. There would be challenges ahead, she knew. The treaty remained vulnerable to changing political winds, the Apache's future far from secure. But something fundamental had been proved, that courage, compassion, and persistent truth-telling could sometimes alter the seemingly inevitable course of history. As the train gathered speed, carrying her westward toward Taza and his people, Sarah felt neither the weary resignation of her past nor naive optimism about the future. Instead, she carried something far more powerful, hope, tempered by realism, commitment, strengthened by experience, and the quiet certainty that standing between worlds, however difficult, was precisely where she was meant to be.